Welcome to the Wizards of Ecom, your no-fluff playbook for online success. Each episode is fully packed with actionable tactics you can implement in your business right now. Take your life to a higher level and excel in your online success. It's time to work on you and your business. Let's do this. Welcome back to the Wizards of Ecom podcast. My name is Carlos Alvarez, and I will be your host for the show. On today's episode, I am riding solo, and I'm going to get into a topic that is near and dear to my heart, and that is podcasting, more specifically, consuming podcasts. I'm going to share with you my top 5 podcasts, Amazon-specific podcasts that I listen to, why I listen to them, and hopefully there's some podcasts on this list that you're not currently subscribed to and that you can easily begin subscribing to. So before getting into the topic that we're going to talk about today, something I do not do a very good job at, and that is promoting all of the different events that we have going on. So I plan on changing that, and I wanted to remind everybody that cabins are going fast for Online Seller Cruise. If you're not aware, I host an annual event called Online Seller Cruise, which you can find at onlinesellercruise.com. When I tell you cabins are going fast, this is not to create some false marketing sense of urgency, but rather just a stone cold fact in the way cruise ship events work. When the cruise ship sells out of cabins, or in this case, the amount of cabins that they feel safe selling while still allowing plenty of social distancing, the cruise just won't let you get on the ship. You won't be able to book a cabin. And if you can't book a cabin, you can't go on the cruise. So check out onlinesellercruise.com, grab your event fee, connect with Oscar, our coordinator, so that you could go ahead and just lock in your cabin so that you have the luxury later on of deciding whether you're going to go on the ship. The cruise is from February 5th through the 13th, but again, you can find all the details at onlinesellercruise.com. So let's jump right into the show. Today's show, as evidenced by the title, I'm not only going to share my top 5 Amazon podcasts, but like I mentioned, I'm also going to share a bit about why these shows made the list and the importance of being selective in the content you consume. Before jumping into the list and the criteria, I wanted to share a little bit about, before sharing that, I want to mention here that just because I don't mention that show on my top 5, it does not mean that I don't love the show. It does not mean that I don't listen to it. There's plenty of podcasts that I listen to. I just mean that these 5 are on my list of, I will not miss this. I try to consume almost every episode, and I even work my schedule around many of these shows. So, not meaning to hold everybody in suspense, but the criteria for me, and let's be specific, these are Amazon seller podcasts. I have a totally different set of podcasts that I'll listen to when I'm, just wanting to geek out on digital marketing. Totally different set for mindset. I even have a few podcasts that I listen to every now and then that are more just like shows you would watch on TV, but instead you're listening to them on the podcast, almost like The Shadow that you could listen to on the radio a lot of times. So the number one criteria for almost any content that I consume is no fluff. So the shows that I'm going to mention have zero fluff. It leads right into the next one, which is they need to be actionable. There are so many amazing Amazon podcasts out there. They need to be actionable. No fluff and actionable. If they're not that, I feel like I consume enough of that sort of content just in the way of blogs, paid email newsletters, books, and just networking. I feel like I cover that stuff. Finally, at that point, no fluff and actionable, we would still be sitting on a pretty extensive list of the shows that would be out there in the Amazon space. I mean, we're blessed to be in a time where there are a ton of no fluff, actionable Amazon seller podcasts in the world. But I needed to narrow that list down some more. So the final criteria is easy to consume. Easy to consume for me means either the podcast is short, 15 minutes or less, something I could just consume running to the corner, taking a quick drive to the office. Or it doesn't go too wide. Like, for example, the first podcast that I'm going to mention on my top 5, there are some episodes where this episode goes longer than I would have liked as far as the time that I have available to consume the podcast. It's still no fluff and it's still actionable, but it goes a little longer than I would like. So in that case where it doesn't, fit perfectly under a certain amount of minutes for the show, I look then for that they don't go too wide. I'm not trying to get a podcast. I'm not trying to listen to a show that is everything you need to know about PPC, for example. I would instead rather listen to a show on, the latest tips and tactics for DSP or display ads or something like that, something very specific. Going so wide and turning it into like the Bible of everything you need to know about such a broad subject is a turnoff for me. It's not that I wouldn't find it entertaining. It's just that I would say that it's not immediately actionable and it's not easy to consume. So those are my criteria: no fluff, actionable, and easy to consume. Pretty straight and to the point. So let's get into the shows. So, God, all of these shows I listened to, these top 5, for different reasons. I felt that I wanted to practice what I preach here and give you something actionable. And perhaps you can't fit 5 more podcasts into your consumption mix, right? Into your podcast stack. So I forced myself, and it was painful to do this too. I mean, I think I know everybody, that I know all of these hosts, just, having been a seller for 15 years. I know everybody here. So it was very difficult, but I decided to put it in an order, like kind of like I'm on an island. I can only pick one podcast. What would I listen to? And I kept doing that all the way down the list to put it in an order from my favorite podcasts that I listen to number 5, which is still amazing. Another note is I did not include this podcast, obviously. I feel like I'm super biased. I appreciate everyone that's listening to this, but I did not mention the Wizards of Ecom podcast. I also didn't mention our sister show, Wizards of Ecom podcast en español. So those are not on here. Don't worry. So the first episode, rather the first show that I listened to, this show is Seller Sessions. So Seller Sessions and Danny McMillan. The show now has two additional co-hosts that are just pure rock stars who I love to death, Izabela Hamilton and Sharon Evan. Danny McMillan, I was listening to Seller Sessions even when it was just Danny with the show many, many, many years ago, way before I ever met him. I've been blessed to be a guest on that show, which is was a proud moment for me. Even took a screenshot, like a selfie style thing, to show wifey. But been listening to Seller Sessions, it feels like, since the beginning of time. And Seller Sessions and Danny McMillan's style of podcasting really inspired me, as I mentioned in episode 0 of this show, was one of the people that really inspired me from a distance, unbeknownst to him, inspired me to start my own podcast. Apart from all that fluffy stuff right there, the show itself, one of the reasons this show makes the top is it does a phenomenal job. I don't want to just say it tells the Amazon news, right? That doesn't sound enough for me, and that doesn't sound like actionable stuff. But it tells the news in a way that's not from I don't know. You can tell it's coming from an actual seller, from somebody that's in the trenches doing this. And they do a very good job at releasing shows. Mind you, these shows are pre-recorded, and I know some of their shows are done via Facebook Live, and the audio is then released on the podcast. But still, a lot of the times these shows are pre-recorded, and they just do a phenomenal job of releasing content out into the world that even myself, with my finger on the pulse of the Amazon selling industry as much as I have, still find myself saying, I didn't know that. Like, when did that happen? Or it gives you a really good idea as to what's coming. Doesn't say this is the way you need to do it. Also stays very unbiased in the whole mix of things, because there's a lot of selling styles and preferences that can be as divisive as Democrat, Republican, it feels in my country. So it does a phenomenal job with that. So the first one is Seller Sessions with Danny McMillan. Great way to stay current on actionable stuff that's happening in the Amazon space. Also has two phenomenal co-hosts, serial entrepreneurs in their own right, and Amazon thought leaders, Izabela Hamilton and Sharon Evan. So number 2, so that's Seller Sessions. That's the one I'd take with me to the island, in case anybody was wondering. If I could only pick one, that's what it would be. So assuming Seller Sessions didn't exist, and I'm going to that same island, and I can only pick one. My next one, I'll take a step back. So Seller Sessions comes out 3 to 4 times a week. That's a lot. That's prolific. We just went to twice a week here on the show, as you know. Since I was blessed to, convinced Noemi Boloshang to be co-host on the show, which has really stepped up the caliber of this show. So we've increased to twice a week. Twice a week is a lot. So 3 to 4 times a week in Seller Sessions is what you can expect there. They've done a phenomenal job as well of keeping that promise with those release dates. I can't recall a time, even when I know Danny's gone through some difficult times, where the show did not, meet its promise and deliver as scheduled. So number 2, if Seller Sessions didn't exist and I'm going to this island, what would I take with me? What podcast would I take with me? It's by far, this was a very, very close call with Seller Sessions, by the way. It would be the show by Mike Jackness and Dave Bryant called Ecom Crew. This show releases once or twice a week, and one of the things I love about Ecom Crew and has really inspired me, a lot of you have, many of you listening to this know that this podcast began as the Wizards of Amazon. And we have a meetup group, South Florida FBA Amazon Sellers. We affectionately refer to ourselves as Wizards of Amazon. During COVID and during our rebrand, where we got an actual amazing physical location, I highly recommend anybody listening to this go to Google, search Wizards of Ecom Miami. There's a 360 view of our location that you can see, like a tour, and you can see how amazing this place is. Anyway, that's my shameless plug. But when I opened that location, I wanted to name it Wizards of Amazon initially, but for me, Amazon feels very restrictive. Everyone listening to this is usually of a higher caliber seller, I've noticed. So yes, we love Amazon. Yes, Amazon dominates the conversation and the traffic when it comes to e-commerce, but there's still another half to that pie. There's still there's a lot of uncharted territory out there that we're just starting to really explore and share, which is Walmart, Rakuten, Overstock, even eBay making some changes, Shopify, a lot of new stuff. So where I decided to come up with the name Wizards of Ecom, Wizards of playing off Wizards of Amazon, the domain was available, but also something that allowed us to have those conversations and fit the vibe and the community that we built of sellers helping sellers. And that was Wizards of Ecom. I actually consumed a lot of content that I had already consumed before by Wizards of Ecom when I decided to go through that rebrand. Nothing about rebranding that I consumed by them, but where I feel and why I listen to them that do such a phenomenal job is they have an amazing balance between talking about Amazon, tactics on how to succeed on Amazon, even a phenomenal blog that they have, I think, put together by Dave Bryant. Podcast seems to be mainly steered by Mike Jackness, but they do a great job in that balance. Like, we talk a lot and we share a lot about how to sell on Amazon, but we also bring in the appropriate mix of these other e-commerce opportunities. And they approach that, I feel, my opinion, they've never told me this, but I feel they approach it from the eyes of an Amazon seller. What do I mean by that? So I recently was on the advisory board of Prosper Show, which just passed. I also blessed with the opportunity to speak at Prosper Show, and being on the back end of Prosper Show, and listening to all the feedback and everything, and already talking about what, the next Prosper Show 2022 is going to look like, which is coming around the corner, which is right around the corner. I say coming around the corner, right around the corner. It it's awesome how it's being identified that, yes, it's an Amazon seller conference. So maybe we don't just talk about Shopify, but there is a good conversation to have. And there's a lot of amazing presentations and knowledge to be shared approaching Shopify from an established Amazon seller perspective. So I feel Ecom Crew, Mike Jackness and Dave Bryant, they do a phenomenal job on the podcast of approaching these other, non-Amazon opportunities from and through the lens of a successful Amazon seller. So that is amazing. I love the show. I don't think I have missed, I've missed an episode sometimes, but I've always caught up. I'm definitely current. I always put a smile on my face when I get that push notification letting me know that another episode has been released of Ecom Crew. So that's number 1 and number 2, Seller Sessions and Ecom Crew. All of these, by the way, I believe are on every podcast player known to man. I'm looking at them on iTunes or Apple Podcasts and the Google Play Store. So, but I'm pretty sure they're available on Spotify as well. I'd be shocked if they weren't. So number 3, assuming Seller Sessions and Ecom Crew didn't exist, and I'm heading to this island with one podcast. This one could be number 1 on its own if this list was my top 5 Amazon PPC podcasts. So if that was the topic, this show would be number 1, and I've not even heard of a close second. And that is going to be PPC Den. It's a weekly episode with Michael Erickson Fascine. I'm not sure I'm saying that last name right, but just look up PPC Den. It seems like they're the founders of an advertising tool called Ad Badger. I have no experience working with that tool. Might be amazing, might not. I don't know. What I can tell you is that the podcast is 5 stars. Most definitely 5 stars. They have on some really wild guests. They have the coolest intro. You never know what to expect. A little hint, their intro jingle, definitely cooler than the one on this show. I'm not sure if it's Michael with an Aussie, like doing an Aussie accent, or if they hired a voiceover person, but they kind of take like almost this Crocodile Dundee approach to hunting this wild animal. And this wild animal is, this animal that will, kill your PPC campaigns by death by 1,000 cuts, and they really work in some normally boring, geeky Amazon terminology and turned it into this fun, wild Crocodile Dundee Aussie-ish adventure. So, Michael's also somebody that I hope to have on the podcast in the future, and somebody that I'm hoping that we can get down to the meetup in Miami, Florida, in person to do some presentations. So anybody listening to this actually that knows Michael or anybody else that I've mentioned here, feel free to reach out to them, share this show with them, and let them know that I'm definitely open to having them come present down here in Miami. So, PPC Den, a little more about it and less about Michael and the intro and everything. This is breaking news stuff. This is breaking news advertising stuff, specific ad placements, budgets, approaches, strategies. They really tear down, and call into question and challenge the accepted way of doing things when it comes to Amazon PPC, like Rebels. I love it. I love the whole Rebel approach. I am very Rebel approach, especially as it pertains to private label and PPC. Similar to Seller Sessions, PPC Den has caught me a few times. Mind you, I run a PPC agency. I closely monitor and manage all the PPC on my active Amazon seller accounts. I'm in the meetup group. I really have my finger on the pulse for stuff. So it's very rare that you can mention something in the Amazon space that I don't know. So whenever that happens, I really appreciate it. At a certain, knowledge is power, and at all levels. But when you get to a much higher level of an Amazon seller or more experience, you realize that you don't need to learn 10 things at a show for the show to be worthwhile, even if you flew across the world. You learn one thing, and that can just, 30x your business, or 30%. I don't mean 30x. Increase your business by 30%, increase your profits by 30%. So being able to conveniently consume this via podcast, they're also very short episodes for the most part, and definitely not too wide. No fluff and very actionable. PPC Den, you definitely want to check it out. So Seller Sessions, Ecom Crew, PPC Den, say those are off the table. We're getting to number 4. What would I take to this island? You know, from the pure enjoyment standpoint, like, this is fun, plus actionable content, plus not fluff, plus easy to consume. If you've never met these guys, Ken and David from the podcast Firing the Man, besides, and they have the .com, but Firing the Man, enough said. It's all in the title. Amazing podcast. I had the opportunity to be a guest on Firing the Man. I believe in its earlier days. It was during the lockdowns, I believe, or right when the lockdowns were starting. They're pushing 80 something episodes. I think I have reliable insider information that they may have closer to 100 queued. Had the opportunity to hang out with Ken and David at Prosper Show in Vegas last week. Feels like a month ago, but last week. And they're just getting started. These two are machines. They bring a potent mix of marketing know-how, data analytics, and Amazon selling savvy. They put all that together in an outside of the box sort of way that it is just a joy to listen to this show. I'm current on this show as well. I went back, binge listened to some stuff. It definitely helps when you know the guys behind this, but they're book lovers just like myself. This is really going to help you, scale your business listening to Firing the Man. And this is coming from people that are actually scaling their businesses. And I believe it's their first businesses too. So they're very open about their mistakes. I'm trying to recall one of the episodes that was like a jaw dropper for me. It was so good and it was so validating that I did an entire meetup presentation on it. And it had to do with, we all talk, and I do a lot of this talking about the importance of building an email list for your Amazon business. And a lot of people's eyes glaze over at that point. If you're one of them, don't worry. I'm not going to go down the email list rabbit hole, but a lot of people understand what I'm saying. I can show people what I'm doing. They get it. But at the end of the day, a step that I just was not paying attention to was the number one question we would all have. If you've never built an email list, and you've never built an email list to specifically leverage in your Amazon business, it's, how do I get people on my email list? So I don't know the episode number. I'll try, if I can, to go back and get it so I can include it in the show notes of this episode. But I think he broke down like 12 different ways to add qualified people to your email list. I wound up doing an episode and adding like 10 more to it. Not an episode. I wound up doing a show on, I might have done a podcast on this too, but it was like 20 different ways to add people to your email list. I had to trump the number. Sorry, Ken. Sorry, David. You guys are amazing. But Firing the Man, check it out. Solid investment in your time. Number 5, assuming that Seller Sessions, Ecom Crew, PPC Den, and Firing the Man were not on the table, and I was going to this island. So I have 2. I know I'm supposed to have 1. I thought long and hard about this. I mean, there's 2. I have a tie for 5th. Consider it a bonus. How about that? But I have a tie for 5. So one of them is Amy Weiss. She has a podcast called Amazing at Home. Highly suggest you listen to it. Well, actually, no, Amazing at Home is her business. Let me get the exact name, because I just think of Amy Weiss and I automatically think about, I believe it's Seller Roundtable. So let me jump into this. Yes, absolutely. So Seller Roundtable, put together by Amy Weiss and Andy Arnott, both very, very brilliant sellers, good-hearted people, moral compass in the right direction, I feel. I've met Amy several times. She was on the panel. She actually put together a panel of mastermind Amazon sellers in Miami not too long ago. Also had the opportunity to hang out with her in Vegas for seller sessions. So seller roundtables, one you want to check out. I mean, they cover it all. Where I found some of their best content came from, or not came from, but that I enjoyed the most, had to do with data analytics, and also had to do with, and data analytics seemed to come mostly from like the Andy side. Not that Amy's not a genius at that, but where the podcast has really blown me away several times and has shown me that, you still have lots to learn, had to do in the area of product sourcing, working with factories, and specifically Amy's approach to that. She's, presented before to the meetup group. She's been a guest on the podcast. Just her company is called Amazing at Home, but the podcast is called Seller Roundtable. The show that is tied with this one, as far as my like top 5, I love listening to this, is the Amazon Seller. It's a weekly, just like the Seller Roundtable, and it's put together by Andy Slamans. Andy Slamans is a long-time veteran Amazon seller and all-around good person. From a distance, I've met Andy a few times, but from a distance, I believe we've both been in arbitrage. We've both done wholesale. We've both done OA. We've both done Kindle. Like, we've both done so many different things in the Amazon space that he's just an extraordinarily well-rounded person, a family man, and has a phenomenal podcast. I don't know if he founded the podcast by himself. I know it was a co-host, which was Liran Hirschkorn, was on the podcast a lot. Still seems to be a frequent guest on the podcast, but those two definitely were a dynamic duo as podcast hosts. But Andy's definitely holding down the fort and still puts on an amazing show. So my number 5s were the Amazon Seller and Seller Roundtable. So respectively, that's by Andy Slamans, Amy Weiss, and Andy Arnott. Number 4 was Firing the Man with Ken and David. Number 3 was PPC Den by Michael Erickson Fashion. Number 2, Ecom Crew by Mike Jackness and Dave Bryant. And number 1, Seller Sessions with Danny McMillan, Izabela Hamilton, and Sharon Evan. So I hope you like that. I really hope it helps. I feel like it's important to have a criteria on the types of things that we consume. We have a very limited a very finite amount of time that we can have and make use of every day, and what we decide to invest our time in listening or reading is extraordinarily important. I'm a voracious podcast listener. And now that we've broke 100 episodes, I'd say I'm also a prolific podcast creator. So I have very tough criteria when it comes to, what I'm going to consume almost religiously when it comes to the different areas of my business as it pertains to podcasts. So I really, really hope this helps. Definitely take a second to check out those episodes. And if you're listening to this, I cannot emphasize enough how important it is for people to be able to find the podcast. Word of mouth is amazing, but for people to find the podcast, for people to know at a glance that the social validation exists for this podcast, it would mean the world to me if you took a second and left this show a review. So I should be able to do that on Apple Podcasts. It has a big impact in the Apple Podcast algorithm and ranking system. And it would just mean a whole hell of a lot to Noemi and I if you did leave a review on the show. So with that, I'm going to wrap this up. I did not, practice what I preach here as far as making this a short episode. We're pushing 30 minutes, and here I was concerned that, it would barely be 10 minutes. Much love. Keep crushing it in your business. Make sure to jump over to Online Seller Cruise to check out that cruise. I look forward to sailing with you. Check out all the amazing speakers and workshop hosts that are already listed on the site, with many, many more about to be added. And I look forward to talking with you next week. It was fun sharing this episode with you. If you found value in what you've heard, please show your love with a subscribe, rate, and review of the show. Until next time.